Well, this episode of Doom Patrol definitely continues the weirdness, right? And I actually, while watching it, it made me think of Legends of Tomorrow because this show, has weirdness and stuff going on, but they mix in comedy and, just other weird stuff. And that's kind of what Legends of Tomorrow does in the CW. I haven't watched Legends of Tomorrow in a long time because I don't have time to watch as much TV anymore as I used to. I used to watch TV all the time, but I've fallen behind on a lot of it. I'm behind on like a lot of the CW shows. I'll catch up eventually. But, from what I remember when I saw Legends of Tomorrow, they like to do weird and comedy, and this episode was like that. And what made me think about that was the scene where Willoughby Kipling was summoning Baphomet. And Baphomet is a talking, singing, horse spirit that sang him a message. And that's actually in the comics too. I'm going to put that image behind me so you can see. They got that from the comics. But just seeing it in real life or real, live action made me think, this is just like something you would see in an episode of Legends of Tomorrow. And I thought that was interesting. That's exactly what I thought of when I saw that. And, as true with DP so far with the Doom Patrol, it's a slower paced show, but I've noticed in this episode, just like the last one, they wait until like near the end to have, the big action scene. I guess to keep, a ramp up, tension or excitement or, the thrills near towards the end of the show to keep you, engaged. Because, the big action scene with, the cult of the Unwritten book attacking the Doom Patrol's mansion, that was like in the last, third of the episode. That was the big action scene. But, all in all, I've kind of accepted the kind of show Doom Patrol is at this point in the pacing. It's a bit slower than Titans. And even though I think I tend to like things a bit more faster paced, usually, I'm still cool with Doom Patrol. And, I can take it as it is. And, I do still enjoy it, and I'm going to stick with it until the end of the season, and I hope it gets a season 2. I might have missed it. They might have already announced Doom Patrol is getting a season 2, but if they did, I missed that article. But, I'd watch it for another season, definitely. But I thought what was interesting with this show, well, there were things character by character I want to talk about. But first I'll talk about Elliot, who's not a member of the Doom Patrol, but, he's got the symbols of the cult on his body, and the cult wants to read it, which is just like in the comics. I thought it was interesting in the beginning of the show how his father tried to warn him at the birthday table or whatever to leave, to escape, and then the mother slit his throat. But I thought that was bad planning by the father because he picked like a horrible time strategically to tell his son that. I mean, while his wife is like 2 feet away and can hear everything, why not wait until, they're alone having father-son time? Because, he has, I assume, all the time in the world to talk to his son, right? I mean, they live in the same house, he's raised him, but he waits until they're, in a celebration when the mother can hear everything to try to warn him. That's why she killed him, because she heard everything and she was like 2 feet away. I don't know, that just didn't seem like a very smart decision on the father's part. I think in real life, I would hope that he'd be a lot, he'd be slicker than that. But it's a TV show, right? But, keep going on. The character I want to talk about first is Rita. Her character arc from the show so far is that she doesn't really want to be a superhero. And that's realistic. Not everybody with powers would want to be a hero. Like there's a lot of people in real life, if they had powers, be like, this is cool, but I'm not really ready to go out and start fighting people and risking my life. But with her, I think it's because her powers are kind of, nasty and gross. I think she's kind of embarrassed and ashamed, and like she doesn't want to go into battle where she's turning into a blob and stuff. And plus, she could be a liability to the team, right? In the first episode, right, she turns into a huge blob and threatens the town. She's afraid, I think, of that. For one thing, she doesn't want everybody to see her being ugly, I think. And that's understandable. And plus, she doesn't want to, like, turn into a monster and be out of control. And maybe people will have to, beat her up or destroy her to control her to get her back to normal. I mean, like, if I were Rita, I might be hesitant, too, if I had those kinds of powers, right? And couldn't control them. So I think it's a mixture of shame and, she doesn't want to be someone whom the team is forced to have to, leave behind or fight because she can't control it. But also, maybe she's not really that courageous of a person because she kind of wimps out at the end. Because what's cool is when the church, attacks Elliot in the mansion in the basement or whatever, the lab, she finally uses her powers more like she does in the comics, where she stretches her arm out to, keep Willoughby Kipling back, because I guess he turned traitor or whatever, or was flipping out. And that's like the way Rita was written in most Doom Patrol stories. Like, she's basically like Mr. Fantastic, right? And so she's learning to control things. But then when the cult comes and take Elliot, she kind of stays back, when I think she could totally take those ladies. But I'm wondering if maybe they're trying to say that Rita's also maybe a coward too. I don't know. I mean, that could be me reading too much into things, but that's realistic too. Not everybody who has powers would be really courageous either. So if that's the story arc they're going with her, I can see that. Also, I think she's trying the way they write Rita in the show. I think she's supposed to be kind of selfish and self-interested, and but she has moments of compassion, and so I think it's a combination of all that with her. But very interesting. And just to know, her character is not really like that in the comics. Rita was very courageous and willing to help people all the time in the 60s comics. And I think in the future, like over the decades, she was always kind of the same way. This show, I think, is the first time where she's shown as a bit more selfish and self-interested. So, they have changed her psychologically for the show. As for Cliff, Robot Man, the last episode, he was uncharacteristically brutal and bloodthirsty, right? Smashing those puppets, killing them, smashing them, their faces in, their bodies in, beating them into pulp, which is easy to do when you're a robot man, right? Because steel is a lot harder than flesh. Now in the comics, Robot Man was never, he was always, ready to fight. He was very, two-fisted and whatever, but I don't remember him ever being this murderous or bloodthirsty. Like, Robot Man was never, beating people to death, like it was a regular thing or like he enjoyed it. At least not in the Robot Man stories I read. This is new for the show. And, Jane calls him out on that, which makes her look hypocritical because her personality, Hammerhead, was slaughtering people just the same way in last episode. And she comes up with this BS excuse why it's okay for her to do it and not him, which is BS, in my opinion. But someone in the comments, I mentioned, Robot Man's uncharacteristic, brutality in the previous episode, and someone in the comments mentioned, well, maybe it's just him not being used to fighting people in a huge metal body. Which makes sense, Robot Man in Doom Patrol, in this version of Robot Man, he's not that experienced being a robot fighter yet. So maybe he doesn't really know how to be, he has to practice being gentler than he would be if he was a flesh and blood man, which actually makes sense. But, that might not be it, because they do allude to the fact, that you're a monster is what she says to him. So maybe he does, maybe Cliff Steele in the show, he does have kind of like a, he does like violence a bit too much. We'll see. I'm not sure where they're going with Robot Man's character, but I don't know. Those are things that made me think about. So it'll be interesting to watch him as the show develops. And next we have Jane, as I mentioned. Jane, if you don't know, she has multiple personalities in the comics because she was sexually assaulted when she was younger. And I think the show is keeping with her origin because when they go into that church, she says a line to Cliff, like, I wonder how many people's lives were messed up in the shadows or whatever, or something like that. And in the comics, Jane was raped in a church. And I think that's what they're referencing in the show. So I think they are going to go there in the show where, she was sexually assaulted when she was younger. And, that's part of what caused her to have multiple personalities. Actually, that is what caused her to have multiple personalities in the comics. And, the DC Universe is not afraid to go there because, they went there in Titans with Hawk, right? Hank Hall. He was sexually assaulted as a kid, which, shaped who he was as an adult. And it looks like, they are going to have, that's not a topic they're not afraid to touch in Doom Patrol either. So they're being pretty accurate, I think, with Jane so far in the show. Cyborg calls his AI system that he uses to, pull up information and, basically access his whole weapons and systems is called Grid. Interesting name because Grid is the name of like an alternate dimension evil version of Cyborg that's like a sentient virus that he had to fight in the Justice League in a Justice League comic book. So I'm wondering if they're, if that's, a sign of a future storyline, like maybe Grid's going to go evil and turn on Cyborg and he'll have to fight him in the Doom Patrol TV show. Because that's basically what happened with Grid in the comics. Grid was like I said, an alternate universe version of like evil Cyborg, an evil computer virus. And so I'm wondering if they're going to take that storyline and adapt it for Doom Patrol where he has to fight his own AI. Because that's where that name Grid came from. So interesting there. And then Kipling has a conversation with Cyborg when they're arguing, and it's like magic versus science and stuff, that the chief that Cyborg and the Doom Patrol knows, the kind, gentle, uncle, Niles Calder, is not the real Niles Calder. There's two. The other Niles Calder is, he's not afraid to make the hard decisions and live with the guilt. And I think they might be alluding to the fact that in the comic books, Niles Calder has a really dark side. He can be very nice, and he usually has good intentions, but he's also got a strong, mad scientist streak. And, he likes to experiment on people and doesn't really care too much about human life that much. He's just not in his quest for more knowledge or just for his awesome, plans that can be kind of psycho. And, I'm wondering if they might go there with the chief in the show. Because in the comics, that's what he's like now. He didn't start out that way, but they retconned him into being that kind of character in the comics. And last but certainly not least, we have Negative Man. Negative Man's relationship with a negative spirit in the show is different than how it was in the original comics. In the 60s comic, in the show, the negative spirit has a mind of its own. It, leaves his body whenever it feels like it, and he can't control it, and they can't communicate well. In the old 60s comics, the original stuff, the Silver Age stuff, Negative Man had complete control almost of the spirit. Like, he commanded it, and it just did whatever he said. He would say, "Go, leave me, negative spirit," to go fight the bad guy, and it would just do it. He would just command it to do stuff, and the spirit obeyed him. There wasn't really, an issue with him not being able to control it. It didn't seem to have much of a mind of its own at all. It was semi-sentient, like it was quasi-intelligent, but it still was like, it was kind of like a pet, almost. He would just tell the negative spirit to do stuff, and it would do it. Later writers over time, though, would play with their relationship and give him problems with the spirit. And in the current comics today, the spirit is like completely sentient. It talks for the first time. The sentient never spoke to anybody. But in current Doom Patrol comics by Gerard Way, I think, the Doom Patrol is like its own like entity that just speaks to people. And, so over time, they've made that relationship more complicated. And it seems like, these later interpretations of the negative spirit and Negative Man, Larry Trainor negative spirit relationship, that's what they're seeing to adapt for the show, where there's problems. And it doesn't just obey him with almost no mind of its own. So, yeah, I'm interested to see where they go with that, too. And the negative spirit in the comics, it turns out where it's like an alien from another planet and stuff. So I'm wondering in the show if they'll eventually have, it turns out with the negative spirit is like an alien from another place. But, maybe that's like season 2 or 3. Who knows? But all in all, good episode, and, I am ready to see how it goes. I don't know, for those of you who read the comics and watch the show too, how do you feel about the differences and similarities between the comics and the show? I think that for the most part, this is faithful to the spirit of the comics, but, because it's a live-action adaptation, they are taking some liberties, as is to be expected. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.